countries in their attempts to protect the right to education in context of emergencies. And following our meetings there, we have developed the Education in Emergencies Advocacy Framework, which is an opportunity to people to engage, further engage, for learn from each other, and implement collaborative actions to protect people's right to education. Today, as you all may agree, education in emergencies has become a very central part of everyday, or should be, everyday education policy in many countries of the world. We are moving the attention from one country to another, talking about emergencies, but without properly securing the right to education of people who have been affected. So to name but one critical example, the loss of thousands of lives, livelihoods, communities, homes, and the destruction of the schools that is happening at this very right moment in Palestine should be a sort of concern because it is breaking international humanitarian law, again the human rights law, and we expect that people, all our members, show solidarity and raise our voice to really advocate for the right to education, and even more importantly, probably for their lives, because to enjoy the right to education, you need to be alive, and we are just witnessing hundreds of people, thousands of people being killed in the Gaza Strip. So the section today is timely for us to better understand how we can cooperate and join forces with Global Education Cluster to protect the education in emergencies for all. The agenda for today. First of all, we are going to have Mr. Ben Monson, the localization specialist of the Global Education Cluster, who will be talking about education clusters and how local leadership can just bring together different initiatives and work, for example, in some contexts with the Global Campaign for Education members. Ben will also kindly agree to just share some ideas about what is happening in the occupied Palestinian Territory Education Cluster and how they are working with other organizations to bring together efforts and collective action for supporting the Palestinians. Following his presentation, we are going to have Bernard Munoz Villalobos, who will be presenting the current version of the AE advocacy framework. And then we will have some time for question and answer. My colleague Kuselga was expecting to be here to share with you some logistics and announcements about the Learning Hub. She prepared some material, and I will read that because she is sick today. And finally, Grant, the global coordinator, Grant Casangwate, will share some closing remarks. So thank you very much for all for joining us today, and thank you, Ben and Bernard, for making time for these presentations. I will now give the floor to Ben, who will have 30 minutes for his presentation. Over to you, Ben, and thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much indeed. I will turn on my camera for a minute and then I'll turn it off because my internet's a bit unstable, but nice to meet everyone on the call. So maybe we can just start. I think that every participant should have their translations they need, so they should be able to hear me. And maybe we could just start with a raising of hands. So in your screen, you should be able to raise your hand. There's a button there to raise your hand. And so from all of the participants, please can you raise your hand if you have heard of the education cluster? Okay, just give everyone a couple more seconds. So about half of you have heard of the education cluster, okay. And of those who have heard of the education cluster, please raise your hand again if you are a member of the education cluster at the country level. So in the country that you work in or you live in, are you a member of the education cluster? Please raise your hand. Okay, so only one of you. I think it's Riho. And Riho, which country do you and Fatima? Which countries are you in? If you could just put in the chat which countries you are in, just so we can see. but it's good that you know, about half of you have heard of the education cluster, and then some of you are members of the education cluster. Hopefully, after this presentation, more of you will be interested in becoming a member of the education cluster. So I think we can, I have a presentation that I think one of our colleagues is going to share on my behalf. El Salvador, okay, great. I think Rio was the other one as well. Okay, great. So I think we can go to, and Uganda. Okay, great. Yes. So I think we can go to slide number 4, I think. We can just skip through. Yes, okay. So I work with the Global Education Cluster, and the Global Education Cluster is just, it brings together all of the education clusters at the global level, but it works in a very, very similar way than the Global Campaign for Education. So much like in your system, you have country level networks, and then at the global level, you have global representatives who kind of work across policy and advocacy. We do very similar things at the Global Education Cluster. So what is the Global Education Cluster? So it's a network of education in emergency actors, both global and national. But what that means is that in around 30 countries in the world where education is at critical risk, or there is a crisis, such as a war, a famine, a flood, a drought, or displacements of people, the education cluster is activated. And then once the education cluster is activated, the idea of the cluster is to bring together every organization in the country that is working on emergency education relief. So whether that's building temporary learning centers or teaching children in disaster affected areas, the idea of the cluster is to bring all of those organizations together to discuss what everyone is doing and to collectively understand the needs of the population, but then also understand how they can respond as a group. So they look for commonalities and they look for ways to make a better response overall. So the Global Education Cluster is not a funder. It does not have money that it gives out to organizations. But what it does do is it brings organizations together and it looks for opportunities to provide a better response in emergency contexts for children. We work at every country where there's a humanitarian emergency, and it's currently 30 countries in the world. And if you go on our website, you can see the countries that we work in. But it's a mix of countries in South America, in Eastern Europe, in Africa, and the Middle East, and in the Pacific as well. So we have quite a wide variety of contexts. So at the global level, we provide assistance, we provide guidance and support to our teams in country. And in country, we have usually 1 or 2 people who are employed to coordinate and work with all of the organizations in country. And they have monthly meetings, and I'm sure we've heard about El Salvador and Uganda. I'm sure our colleagues attend monthly meetings for their cluster there as well. And we also, in big countries where the response is very large and the needs are different in different areas, we also set up sub-national clusters where in a district or a state, organizations are brought together there to also coordinate their work. So our aim is to really look at making responding to education more efficient and also reduce wastage of money in terms of response. Next slide, please. Okay, so just a quick overview of last year. So in 2022, The Global Education Cluster supported 34 countries in total. And at the global level, the cluster is supported by UNICEF and Save the Children. So we are a team made of those two organizations that provide assistance to these 34 countries. And through the cluster response, we understood that there were 70 million people in need of humanitarian education assistance last year. 31 million of those were targeted with humanitarian assistance. And we requested funding of $2 billion to support those 31 million children, but we are only funded 27% of that. So just over $500 million was given to all organizations that supported humanitarian education last year. So that you see there's quite a gap. Not as many organizations will receive funding versus the needs of the communities. And next slide, please. So education is just one of many ways that organizations and a response works in a disaster. When a disaster hits and the clusters are activated, there are 11 different clusters that focus on different areas of response. You can see education is there on the left, but there are 10 other areas, such as food security, health, and each one of those clusters is led by a different agency. And you can see education is led by UNICEF and Save the Children. Next slide, please. Okay, so the difference with the education cluster is that it's the only cluster that's co-led, so it's joint led by both a UN agency and an NGO. So Save the Children is an NGO, and we're co-lead the cluster. What's the benefit of that? Because the UN are very strong organizations, but they also have their limitations. Save the Children has some different value adds, and they can add child safeguarding, child participation, and also supporting local civil society engagement into the cluster system. These are some added values of Save the Children being involved in the cluster. So one of the key aims of Save the Children is how do we get more local organizations involved with the humanitarian response? And this is where you come in. We know that you are all networks of education actors in your context, and many of you are in contexts that have humanitarian situations happening, whether it's floods, wars, droughts, and therefore there's a way that we can work together, and we'll go on to talk a bit more about that later on. Next slide, please. So we've got lots of key materials. We have a website that lists all of the countries that we work in. And it also has, in each country, the number of organizations that we work with and the number of children in need in each country, as well as the number of children we're trying to reach in each country with education support. And we also have our strategy on the website. And if you wanted to read that, you can understand what our priorities are in the next few years. So there's lots of resources on there, as well as guidance to support local organizations to become more informed and involved in the humanitarian cluster as well. So at the moment, globally, local organizations, so local and national organizations, make up around 60% of education clusters. So what that means is at the country level, the majority of members are from communities, and they're from, the country that the response is happening in. This means that many of your members, so I know that you are networks and you're coalitions, but I know that you're made up of many different members at the country level. This means that I'm sure if your context has some kind of humanitarian response happening, you will probably have many of your members that are part of the education cluster already. Next slide, please. Okay. And again, so different types of organizations offer different skills and different opportunities to improve the humanitarian response. Ultimately, our aim as an education cluster is to make sure that the most children are supported with the most amount of education support, whether that's being in school, whether that's access to quality education, or whether that's being protected in a learning environment. All of those things are a priority as an education cluster. And it's very hard to do in a context where the situation is changing very rapidly and there is a lot of challenge in the context. So we need to work better, and we need to work more with local organizations. And you can see here from the statistics that local organizations make up the majority of organizations that the education cluster works with. So why is it important that we work more with local actors? Well, because local organizations and local networks have much better contextual knowledge of what is happening in the context that we're working in. And each year, when the cluster makes plans, collective plans and strategies, we need to first understand the needs. So if local organizations are involved with that needs assessment and sharing of the local needs, it means that we have a much better overview of what the needs and the challenges are. And therefore we can respond better and build better plans. Also, local organizations have a presence in the field already. We know that local organizations work and live in communities, and that means that there will be a continued level of engagement from local organizations after the response as well. Often with international responders, when the money is there, they respond to the needs. And then as soon as the money goes, they often are no longer responding in those communities. But the good thing about local organizations is that they are embedded within communities, and therefore their response is often much more sustainable and longer lasting. Additionally, what is the benefit for local organizations and local networks to join the education cluster? Well, it's primarily a learning platform. The cluster is not a place for people to just get things from, but it's also a place where you can share things as well. So it's a forum every month where you can share what you're doing, what work you're doing, what's going well, some of the learnings you've had from your work, and any advice you can give to people. But also you can receive advice as well. If you're having challenges, whether it's access to a community or whether it's you don't know how to build a certain temporary learning center, there'll be guidance on that as well. And although the education cluster does not provide funding itself, it provides access to funding. So we have contacts with the humanitarian system. So there's a system called the OCHA system, where every year in a humanitarian context, OCHA gives out money and they put that money through the clusters. So the clusters at the country level are involved in the decision-making on which organization receives funding through that mechanism each year. And also it's a chance to influence what's happening in the country. If you're working in a context and you want to see changes in the response because you think the needs are not being met, by working through the cluster, you can inform and support decision-making to make changes as well. And also it's a good opportunity to have your voice heard. We know that often local organizations are not able to have the same space in conversations with donors, with decision makers, with people that are making these, changing plans for a context. And therefore, by being in the cluster, your voice is being heard as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so there are many ways that we can support more local organizations to be involved in the education cluster and any clusters. And there's kind of 5 key areas, and we've discussed them a little bit here, but we've said that, participation and inclusion is the first step. If local actors are not involved in the cluster, how do we know what they need? How do we know what they want? And how do we know how to support them? So having local organizations involved in the cluster is the first step. And we encourage education clusters to hold meetings in the local language so that local organizations can understand the meeting and can contribute meaningfully. Also, we know that many international organizations and the UN hold funding relationships with local organizations, and it's important that those funding relationships are ethical and they treat organizations with respect. The cluster is an advocate for making sure that local organizations are treated well in these funding relationships, and that relates to funding, that we try wherever possible to ensure that local organizations are receiving a fair share of humanitarian funding. We know now globally, more than 90% of funding goes to international organizations, and that's not how it should be. So we're trying to encourage more funding to local organizations. But also we know that we need to support local organizations to be able to have a stronger impact on the work that we are doing. We know the system that we are in is not perfect, and therefore we need to support local organizations understand this complicated system that has been built by international actors, and we need to support them to influence it as well, because we know the system that we work in needs some changes, but before those changes are happening, we also need to make sure that we're supporting local organizations to be better informed about the system, and they have more capacity to be able to influence it and change it as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to go into some examples in a minute. There's lots of different ways that local organizations can be more meaningfully involved in humanitarian coordination. And as I said before, one of the first things that you can do, so this is a kind of a message to everyone on the call, because I know that you are national coalitions of education actors. I know that some of you are in development contexts, and some of you are in more emergency contexts. So what I would recommend to each of you on the call is that after this call, you go on the Global Education Cluster's website and see whether there is a cluster activated in your context. So as I said, last year we had 34 contexts where we had an education cluster. And if you see that there is an education cluster in your context, I recommend that you reach out to your clustering country, and you'll be able to find the contact details online as well. And if you can't, you can let me know. But I think that by accessing those meetings, you will understand a bit more about what is happening in terms of the response in your context. But just for clarity, this will not happen in every context, because the cluster is only ever activated when a government is not able to respond themselves, and when a government asks for additional support to be able to respond to an education emergency. So countries like Kenya and other places like that they're not emergency settings, so they will not have a cluster activated. And we know that the Kenyan government is able to respond very strongly. So that's an example. Additionally, on top of that, in South Sudan, for example, we supported a national organization to hold a leadership position in the cluster. So in South Sudan, they were able to bring in a local organization to sit at the leadership of the education cluster. And now that person has been enrolled for about 9 months. And so normally the cluster is led by an international actor, but in South Sudan, it is also now led by a local organization. And from that, we've seen that basically the benefit of that is that more local organizations have felt comfortable becoming involved in the education cluster. And anecdotally, we've had feedback that local actors have felt more comfortable speaking out in cluster meetings as well. So I think let me just see if any of my colleagues are online. I just need to see the attendee list quickly. I don't think they are. But yeah, I was hoping that they would give their examples for them from their own countries, but I can't see them online. So I'll give a couple of examples. So that was South Sudan. And then if you go a couple more slides. Yeah, so sorry, one more slide, please. One more. Okay, so yeah, some of the milestones that were achieved by this kind of initiative were that more local organizations were involved in the education cluster. Local organizations had more of a decision-making power in the cluster as well, and that we hope that going forward that local organizations will be able to kind of drive the way forward for the planning and strategic development of the cluster going forward. One of the challenges and the recommendations were from this project that there needs more funding for this. You know, as I said, we are not a funder, but we have to appeal to donors and other international actors for more funding. We were lucky in South Sudan to get 3 years funding to support this role, but it's quite rare to be able to get that level of funding. We also understand that, you know, government engagement is key to this as well, because humanitarian action is very key at the beginning of a response. But once a response is multiple years old, you need to start thinking about how can we get government involved in a more thorough way as well. Okay, so I think I've only got a few minutes left. So I think rather than going through the slides, I think I'm just going to give a couple more examples of other things that we've been able to achieve in the education cluster. So in Cameroon 2 years ago, we had very limited access to the emergency. So in Cameroon, there's a current conflict where much of the country is not able to be visited. So, but we knew that we had lots of community-based education organizations that were living and staying in these locations. So what we did was we supported these local organizations to conduct an assessment, a very rapid needs assessment of their own communities, and share those needs assessment with you know, the cluster. And that meant that from previously not being able to have kind of access to information on what was happening in those communities, we were then able to have a basic idea of the non-formal education situation in those contexts, which led to a really nice synergy by working locally through local community-based organizations, but also using the strategic decision-making of the cluster as well. Additionally, in Ukraine this year, the cluster was building a strategy with the government, and we, as a team, we decided it was, rather than having a meeting at the national level to get an understanding of what the needs were, we had to go to every different region of Ukraine and talk to local education organizations to understand what is the different needs in each of your communities. And from that, we were able to get a much more diverse series of views on what the needs were across Ukraine. And that allowed us to create a strategy that was much more localized, much more contextualized, and allowed for a strategy that was that could be flexible and meet the needs of different parts of the country. So I know I've probably had most of my time now, but I'll maybe just stop there and just maybe just pause and just kind of see from a raise of hands from the chat box, you know, I think we can stop sharing the screen now. Thank you. Maybe from a showing of hands, who now feels like they understand what the education cluster is? It's okay if you don't, but who feels like they understand what the education cluster is? If you can raise your hands. Okay, great. We're getting a few hands there, which is good. Well, I'll say it one last time, just so it's really clear. It's a system where in humanitarian context only, so only in humanitarian contexts, where education organizations that are responding to the humanitarian needs come together and they work together to understand the needs of the context, but also then how they can collectively respond to the context together. So it's not about working on a project together, but it's about how can they all work together with the resources they have to better address the needs of the context that they're in. Okay, well, maybe I'll stop there and just see whether there are any kind of questions or any clarifications anyone needs before I hand over to the next presenter.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you very much for this very informative presentation. So let's see if people have questions that you suggest, and you can address them right now. So everyone who wants to have a comment or a question, please just raise your hand and you can open your micro, or you can just write in the chat box. It seems to me that we don't have questions at the moment, or let me just double check here. I see Gebor and Julie. Gebor.
You have Ivok first and Julie second.
Hi, Gebor.
Hi, everyone.
Nice to have you here. Please go ahead with your comment or question for Ben.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very interesting, and it will be good to have this presentation. The slides, I mean. And I think that Armenia and especially Artsakh coalition would be interested to join the cluster and to cooperate. I will share the information with my colleagues, and I think that we will join and cooperate within this framework.
Well, thank you very much for your comment, Gregor, and we can definitely share the presentation. I think the Global Campaign for Education team can share the presentation with all the colleagues on the call. Just to let you know, we don't have a cluster activated in Armenia at the moment, and one of the requirements for a cluster to be activated is that the government of a context has to request it to be formally activated. So in Armenia, the government probably has not asked for additional support in their emergency context. So we don't have a context there, but and I'll put a link to our website in the chat box so everyone can see. But if anyone that's interested, they can click on the website link and they can see whether their country is one of the countries that has a activated cluster. So you'll be able to see from that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
I have a question for you, Gebor, because you are raising the interest of the coalition to join a cluster if this is available in the near future. What do you think it could be good to have a cluster now in the context of Armenia? Because we have learned of past conflicts, in particular last year, with the issues with many people fleeing from different parts. So I just want to hear more about what do you think it could be relevant to have a cluster now?
First of all, we need to know much more detailed, and then we can decide how can it be implemented, how it can be, it can support this framework, this instrument, how can be used in our situation. But I hope that such instrument, such structure can be useful. And now I cannot say how it can be, but I hope that it will be useful.
Thank you, Gabor. Thank you very much for, yes, sharing these views. And before I saw Julie Juma, you have a question or a comment, Julie? Or maybe no longer you have something to say? And I see also Ikra Hussein. So Ikra, just open the microphone and yes, feel free to ask the question or make your comment. Are you there, Ikra? Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Okay, so now question from Ikra and then from Tasneem. Over to you.
I'm not asking a question, but I know I'm going to say thank you.
Excuse me, Ikra, what you said?
I don't have a question, but only I say thank you.
Okay, no, that is okay. Thank you, Ikra. Thank you so much. Now,
Okay.
Tasneem, over to you, Tasneem.
Thank you, Louis. Just I need 2 minutes because I'm Palestinian, and I would like firstly to thank you because you expressed your solidarity with Palestine. But I want to just provide you with the reflection about what's really happening in Gaza. Since we are talking about our session is about education in an emergency, and the Gaza Strip is currently suffering from a huge humanitarian catastrophe due to the continuous Israeli bombing on Gaza Strip since October 7 until now. And with regard to education, in this tragedy, education is not a priority actually. As of yesterday, the 32 of November, around 3,270 students were killed. This means that more than 3,000 school desk is empty. More than 3,000 dream will not be achieved. More than 3,000 smile is disappeared. In addition to this number, there are also 487 teachers were killed in Gaza. 260 schools were completely or partially destroyed, in addition to 121 schools that are being are being used as the shelters. And I cannot imagine the situation of the people who survived, if we can call them survivors. I don't know how they can continue their life, or I wonder if they can think about something other than survival. Actually, this tragedy did not destroy the building only. It destroyed the humans. For me, as person who work in the field of education, I'm a Palestinian refugee living in Jordan. It also demolished me from inside because I feel that there is no space for hope. There is no space. The future is really full of uncertainty. So what can we do? I'm calling for the voices of all of you to demand for permanent ceasefire. We have now 4-day truce, but after these 4 days, the bombing will continue, and the bombing will continue, and the destruction of schools and human will continue. So we really need a ceasefire. If we reach to ceasefire, permanent peace ceasefire, a lot of work needs to be done on humans to rebuild the trust on humanity. So I will end with the question for you all. Will we able to raise and unify our voices to save education in Gaza? Will we be able to save the rest of the students, teachers, and the schools, or Gaza will be forgotten? Thank you.
Thank you, Tasneem. Definitely, the Global Campaign for Education is on board for advocating for the right to education and the people on Gaza. Thank you very much for sharing all these important, updates about what is happening there. And as you, I can really imagine how it's living in that situation when you can be just killed and have no really opportunities to go somewhere else and to enjoy your life. I don't know, Ben, you have something to say or to share related to what is happening in the context of, feel free to go now.
Yeah, and Tasneem, I just want to give my condolences to you and all of people in Palestine at the moment. Just to show, I put the list of all the contexts where the education cluster is activated at the moment, and Palestine is one of these places. So just to give you a very, very quick overview of what we are doing in Palestine at the moment. But before I say that, I will agree with you that unfortunately and sadly, in humanitarian response, education is often deprioritized. It is often the food response, the shelter, and the wash and health that are seen as the kind of the four critical pieces. But one of the big advocacy points that the Global Education Cluster is doing is to push for EIE, education in emergency, as a first response as well. So that's just some context. But in Palestine at the moment, and even before October, we have a Palestinian coordinator in the West Bank, as well as a Palestinian information manager who is collecting all of the information on needs and what education actors are doing in the country. We also had a cluster lead in Gaza. Unfortunately, given all of the things that are happening in Gaza, he's currently, not working at the moment. He's just trying to survive at the moment, which is completely understandable. So what we are doing is we are providing some surge support to the team. We know that this is a crucial time for response, but we also know that our team in country need to have the space to do the things that they need to do at the moment. It's very tough for them as well. So we are giving them the space they need, but also we are providing technical support and guidance, and we are providing some surge support both remotely at the moment, and in early December we'll have some team going in to provide support in country as well. And what we've seen so far is an amazing response from education actors in Palestine. Like Palestinian local organizations have been amazing. They have been working around the clock to support education needs, even in a context where their lives are at risk as well. So we are trying to support the response. Obviously, there's only so much that is possible at the moment, but the education cluster is trying to bring together actors that are working on the response and trying to look at the overall needs and how we can meet them collectively.
Thank you, Ben, for sharing all of this. Very important. And I would like to ask all the people attending this meeting, because Tasneem Al-Mohar question really deserves an answer. Who in this call is willing, for example, to sign a letter, to use our voice, to contest for the right to education and for the lives of people living in Palestine? So please raise your hand if you will be willing, for example, in the case Tasneem, want to draft a letter for all of us to support and to really fight for justice in the context of Palestine. So raise your hand if you are willing to sign that letter, and I would think that could be a kind of an answer for the question raised by Tasneem. So I don't see really hands. Just two people are really willing to support this cause, or I am wrong? I see more hands here, so this is appreciated. So Tasneem, call on the Global Campaign for Education. I mean, we are really willing to support in the way you can see that is best. So to advocate for the lives of the people there and for the right to education. So I see a question for you here, Ben, from Monica Cortez. And the question is, I would like to know how the education clusters include the disabilities perspective. Over to you, Ben. Please, Gabor, close your micro, and everyone close the micro, and let you want something to share. And over to you, Ben. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Monica. Yeah, I think that is a key point. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to encourage local organizations of disability groups to have a voice and a platform in the education cluster. So we know that the barrier to enter in the cluster is there for all organizations. It's harder for local organizations because often English isn't the first language. So that's one barrier. But we also know that there's an even bigger barrier for disability groups and organizations of peoples of disability. So what we do is, in a given context, we try to map out different organizations that exist, and we try to search for organizations of peoples with disability. The cluster itself does not consult directly with community members, but it works with organizations. So therefore, if there are organizations that represent peoples of disability, we really encourage them to join and become a member. And we will talk with them directly to understand how we can make it easier for them to join a meeting, whether that's, supporting them to bring in a sign language or other ways of communicating so that it's more accessible. So it's a priority for us, and we're trying to do it in different ways. But ultimately, one of the challenges is that often we don't know where these disability groups are. So we very much rely on our existing members to show us and tell us where and how we can engage with disability groups. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you very much. So I do believe now I will give the floor to Bernard Munoz to share with us the current version of the advocacy framework. Thank you, Bernard, and over to you.
Thank you very much. Greetings, colleagues. Greetings from Costa Rica. My name is Bernard Munoz. I work for the GC at the head of policy and advocacy, and it's always a pleasure to catch up with you and to discuss this super substantive issue of education and emergencies, which is in fact one of the key issues for GCE, and it has a substantive position within the strategic plan, the GCE strategic plan. So thank you, Luis Eduardo, and thank you, Ben, for your fantastic presentation. So it's my intention just to comment on the latest version of the Education and Emergencies Advocacy Framework. You may remember that this framework was presented and completed during the Addis Ababa meeting back in August. So thank you so much to those colleagues who contributed to this text. I really feel that we have a kind of very useful material for guiding our work on emergencies and education. So, guys, I will not I will not do the karaoke, I will not read the entire text because you already have it, so it doesn't make any sense for me to repeat what is in front of your eyes. So you have the text, and please share with us any final comment that you may wish to do, and we will be very happy to introduce any substantive issue that we are now missing. In any case, this is a work in progress always, so we can continue, remaking document and completing with several ideas that we are now missing. So what I'm going to do now in these 10 minutes is just to highlight some of the key issues of this advocacy framework. So again, it was presented and completed in the Addis Ababa workshop that we have in August. The advocacy framework has a background, obviously, and just need to highlight the fact that there are 222 million vulnerable girls and boys who are affected by different kind of emergencies, and 40 million of these persons are affected by climate-related emergencies, and this clearly shows how climate change has produced a lot of emergencies that we didn't face in the past. So now climate change emergencies are, getting more relevance every day. And there are also in many cases interlinked with conflict and other kind of emergencies and disasters. And just need to highlight that 50% of girls, specifically girls without education opportunities, live in countries affected by crisis as well. So this is important to just highlight the gender phase of emergencies, and many of the current people without any education opportunities are people with disabilities. So the look the look on person with disabilities is on how they are affected by emergencies is absolutely key. And I believe that Monica is very much an expert on this, and this is something that we should consider deeply in our work. So just let me recall that education in emergencies is covered by both the international human rights law as well as the humanitarian law. Even though it is not covered in the Sustainable Development Agenda, however, the SDG 4 clearly set the target to have by 2030 all boys and girls completing the free, equitable, inclusive, and quality education in the primary and secondary levels. So obviously there is a huge gap between what the international human law says and the actual practice in our world, no? So we need to work hard in order to overcome the legal rhetoric and the actual situation in the ground. And just
Remember about that. Please, everyone, just close the microphone if you are not just asking a question or whatever. So sorry, Bernard, go ahead.
No, that's okay, Salma. You have the power to shut the microphones as well, so
Yes.
you can do it. Okay, and just let me also remind that refugees and internal displaced people are usually the victims and usually the more concerned persons during emergencies. So we should also have a look at their specific realities and necessities. So regarding the background, the only thing that we are missing now is the mention to the Gaza situation. But just to recall that GC has released a statement on Gaza, so we can easily introduce in the framework, in the background, this information. So in terms of the purpose of the framework, just to mention that the aim of this instrument is to facilitate the implementation plans for GC members and partners regarding their advocacy activities. So we believe that this framework would facilitate this task. Also, the framework includes a couple of basic definitions, which are operative definitions on emergencies and education in emergencies. And this would facilitate the development of a strategic approach that we are looking forward to have with this instrument. So in terms of the strategic approaches, the document covers at least 3 important things. The first one is to encourage to develop a common understanding, a common language on what we understand by emergencies and educational emergencies. And this is crucial in order to facilitate coming up with with a policy engagement that really covers all GC members and partners' interests and work. and developing a common understanding of education in emergencies also would facilitate the research and the political assessment, which is necessary to influence decision making at the local level. Then we believe that this framework is very much aligned with the GCE's strategic plan. So this is also crucial in order to work together, to facilitate working together. And also, we believe that as a strategic approach is also crucial to understand that we should take advantage of any opportunity to advocate for education in emergencies. So GC is also ready to facilitate these processes. And then finally, the framework also includes some key advocacy actions. And maybe just let me recall that maybe the most important action is to demand government's actions and international community actions on education in emergencies. Recalling that these actions are a key obligation of states according to the international human rights law. So it's absolutely fundamental for GC to recall that states, and governments, and public institutions have a key responsibility on addressing education in emergencies. So this is absolutely key for me. And then the framework also recalls to engage systematically with local, regional, and international global education clusters. And we really believe that engaging with the clusters is absolutely a key action that we should undertake. So we are inviting all national education coalitions to engage with the clusters where they are working. And this is a very important action to consider it. Then the framework also recalls on contributing to building resilience, prevention, preparedness, and social cohesion, and also addressing the specific situation of refugee population. Yeah, I mean, we should recall that we should consider that emergencies are not an abstract thing, and there are people suffering, there are people needing support, and refugees should be at the center of our interests. But also the framework also considers addressing the curriculum development. So I think that the framework also provides some curriculum hints and governance suggestions. And just let me provide some examples of the actions that are already in the framework. For instance, support research on prevention, preparedness, and response, advocate for effective distance education, blended approaches, temporary learning spaces, using the EdTech during emergencies. I think that this is absolutely crucial to develop flexible platforms wherever the emergency arises. Obviously promote peace education, secure gender equality at all levels and with all actors, and advocates for the establishment of technical groups working for education in emergencies. And finally, promoting the development of core protocols to deal with education in emergencies. So you have the chance to just review the final document that we have shared with you, and to share with us any possible comment or final suggestion that you may have. And we can take it from there and just start with the implementation of the action plans. So we also understand that this framework should be adapted to all the specific circumstances where our members work. So the framework is not written in stone. It should be flexible, and it should take into consideration the huge diversity that we have in our movement. Then the role of the Education in Emergencies Learning Community. We believe that this community is absolutely key in order to steer the development of the framework and to just share knowledge and share common learnings around the implementation of Education in Emergencies plans. So the Education in Emergencies community is not only about learning each other, but it's also about leading the political direction of our movement. And so it means that this group has an advisory role to play, which is absolutely central for GC. And yeah, we're looking forward to have a session in March. So it would be very interesting that our members can share a bit of information about the implementation of each advocacy plan in Education in Emergencies. And this would also lead us to the chance to reform and update our advocacy framework and to learn about the successful actions that each member has developed during this time. So we are very much encouraging, again, to engage with national education clusters where there is a good opportunity for everyone. And we are also encouraging our members to engage with all humanitarian and development actors and human rights communities. So this is also crucial in order to build the necessary muscle that we need to really have a meaningful impact on education in emergencies. So finally, GC is obviously committed to actively integrate education in emergencies in all the work that we do. So emergencies is also related to building equality and inclusion, related to gender approaches, and obviously is related to disability and inclusive education spaces. So I will stop here, and we are also sharing the framework again with those colleagues who don't have it. So Paula, I thought that I shared with you the framework, but I will share it again. So no worries. Thank you so much for your attention. Back to you, Yusera.
Thank you, Bernard. Thank you very much. Very important detail for the work the Education and Emergency Learning Community works, and the very central role that our advocacy framework will have in the following up of this learning community. So this is probably the time for you want to share a comment or a question for Bernard. So let me see if there is any hand raised. I don't know, Gibor, if that is your previous hand, probably, or if you have a comment or a question here. And everyone is invited to make questions or comments. So I see Odinakachi, sorry. Odinakachi and then Cherche Solon. So Odinakachi, over to you and thank you. Please open your microphone. Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you, Luz. My name is Odinakachi from the National Education Coalition in Nigeria. And sorry, I joined quite late. And for us in Nigeria, we are very passionate on education in emergency because Nigeria is one of the countries that is facing insurgency in all the 6 geopolitical zones in Nigeria. It's no longer a news that Nigeria is facing a lot of crisis, and the crisis is no longer in the Northeast, but has spread across the whole 6 geopolitical zones in Nigeria. And being a national coalition in Nigeria, we are member of the Education National Group at the national level and also at the state level. So anything pertaining education is emergency is something that we hold very, very pertinent, and we really want to engage with GCE and any other relevant partner that really wants to come to the aid of Nigeria. We have a lot of work in our hand. At the moment, Nigeria has about 20 million out-of-school children, which, if proper research is done, is more than that. So Nigeria is an emergency situation. Most children are not attending school in the Northeast, in the Northwest, and part of the southern part of Nigeria. And at the moment, we have developed the national policy on safety and security. And we are looking for support to see how that policy will be implemented across the globe. Because one of the challenges I find that in Nigeria that we take time, spend funding to develop policies, but unfortunately it's very, very difficult for us to implement. And the implementation cannot be left in the hand of the government because most of their policies are being politicized. So for us in Nigeria, the National Education Coalition is in dear need of support to see how these policies can be implemented and also support children in an emergency situation to at least get some form of level of education. So I'm so passionate about this education in emergency meeting, and I am willing to respond to any question and any support or advice that really wants to come to Nigeria, because we are the only solution to the bringing back the number of out-of-school children to Nigeria, because leaving it in the hand of government, despite several supports coming from different angles, coming from GPE, coming from other development partners, and also a lot of funding that has been mapped out from government to support the activity of the out-of-school children. It has not been yielding any dividends because the civil society in the country, which SACEFA represents, is not really is not giving that opportunity to come in. There are a lot of bureaucracy, and we are constrained with dwindling funding that we might not be able to implement or to do much intervention, whether at the national level and at the state level. However, we are very grateful that we are implementing Education Out Loud project, which is funded by Global Partnership on Education. But looking at Nigeria, Nigeria is more or less like a continent, not like a country. So the funding is so meager that it's very difficult for us to use such funds to cover the whole 36 states. Although we have been making a whole lot of impact in the 13 states where we're implementing Education Out Loud projects, but we need a whole lot of support in terms of capacity strengthening of SACEF, of the coalition members, and also the secretariat. It might not necessarily be funding, but any institutional support in terms of strengthening the capacity of SACEFA member to begin to demand for at least accountability on education budget, and also raise awareness on the need for government to do the needful on the number of out-of-school children in Nigeria. That would be really, really appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Odinakachi. So I see you are really very passionate about education and emergencies. It is good to share with you all this passion. And we will definitely have you in mind for a future section on our learning community. And you will have the time to share all these important details, yes, in more detail. So over to you, Sergio. Please, a quick comment or question, because we only have 15 minutes left for the session and still things to deliver. Sergio, go ahead with your comment or question, please.
Okay, hello, good evening, everyone. And thanks for this opportunity to talk with members of GCE. So our situation here in the Philippines, specifically in the area where I live, is the Eastern Visayas. So it is struck the most by the human climate induced impacts such as typhoons. And recently, one of our municipality is flooded for almost 1 week now. So schools have been closed, and then there are also insurgency, but it's more like of insurgency in the mountains. Then some schools are also closed. So those are the challenges that we are facing right now here in our area. But overall, we try to manage because the government, the Department of Education, would try to portray that everything is okay, when in truth and in fact, it's not okay. So the project that we have started in partnership with Education Out Loud in our area is Sendai localization. It's more like of responding to the natural disaster. Lately, we have experienced earthquake. No, so those are the situation here in our locality.
Sorry, I was mute. Thank you, Sergio. Thank you so much. I don't know, Bernard or Ben, you want to make a comment of what you heard? Otherwise, we will
Yes.
continue with the agenda.
Thank you very much to Xerxes and Odikanachi. I just want to also to bring an important message regarding our relation with governments. I mean, our first responsibility is to demand from state the necessary actions to adopt human rights-based educational emergencies plans to respond to the different kind of disasters, conflict, and emergencies. But once those sound plans are in place, we should work with governments in the implementation of those plans, always with a critical view, you know. I mean, we should try to work all together for the implementation of this education and emergency plan. I mean, this is the meaning of all of our work. So I just needed to highlight this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We have already initial partnership with the government, but sometimes the bureaucracy, you have to go through a maze. That's how bureaucracy work in our area. But at least we already have some partnership, but it needs to be drum up still. We have a good start.
Thank you, Xerxes.
Thank you, Sergio. So now it is time for me to share some of the key logistics announcements for the next sessions of the learning community. As I mentioned at the beginning, it was prepared by my colleague Kuselwa, but couldn't join today because she's feeling not well. So as you are probably now seeing my screen, we have three very key messages to share. First of all, is that we are maintaining a database of confirmed community members. You might remember when we have this meeting in Addis Ababa, we asked people to join and all of you raise a hand. So, but if anybody can or haven't received an email, so you just need to be in contact with us. So call to actions, individual and other organizations interested in joining the A&E learning community can submit an expression of interest through this online platform. So I will put, or my colleague Sal might now put in the link on the website, on the chat box, and you can just link and send us a message and you will receive an automatic email with the details. The second key message is that we have an online space for the education and emergency learning community in the Learning Hub. And members can use this space to share information and resources and collaborate on interventions for education in emergency and advocacy. So we trust that this all information relevant and that people can just share across all the members. So please make sure the material you share is definitely the one that you want to share for the purposes of the learning community around education in emergencies. So the action you need to take if you are interested in that, and if you haven't received of that information, just go through the second link that Salma is now probably putting on the chat box, and then you just follow the link and register yourself for giving or receiving the credentials. And the last announcement, we will be setting up a convening group for each learning community. So co-conveners will work with the Secretariat, I mean the Global Campaign for Education Secretariat, to set up and deliver the learning community annual plans starting in 2024. As Bernard mentioned, we are planning to have a meeting in March 2024 that will be a kind of important, very important session, because we are going to set what could be the plans for the next of the year, and this will be also an opportunity for you to share what you have done. For example, if between now and March, you have the possibility to engage with the local national cluster and to see, for example, whether you can work together, collaborate together to protect education in emergencies. So it will be something that you can share during that session, and to all of us develop kind of key ideas to follow up the process through the 2024 and the years to come. Call to action here. We will circulate the call for expression of interest for this before closing this 2023, and you will need only to respond and say you are really want to collaborate in this process. So I don't know if any of you have a question related with the announcement that were prepared by Kuselwa. Any comment or question, something that is not clear? So please raise your hand or make a comment directly. So if that is not the case, I will please ask my colleague Salma. Please, Salma, share the links. I don't know if you already have done so, but please make sure to share the links with everybody here, just in case you need to update your credentials or to ask for the registration or to be included in the website. So Odinaki, please close your micro. And so I don't know, Ben and Bernard, if you want to say something before me closing the session.
Not from my side. Thank you, Mr. Eduardo.
Thank you, Bernard. Ben, do you want to add something, make any announcement related to what you have said or whatever, any future activity related to the education cluster? Feel free to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, I would say thank you to everyone's interest today and for the opportunity to share about the cluster. And I think, you know, on the list of countries that I shared in the chat, you know, if any of you are based in those countries, I encourage you to reach out and connect with your cluster coordinator in those countries and hear what's happening in the cluster and be involved. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Thank you so much. And thank you on behalf of the Global Campaign for Education for making time for this, for bringing opportunities to collaborate and to work together on the ground to protect everyone's right to education. Also, Bernard, thank you very much for sharing the updated version of the advocacy framework and all the people attending this meeting. Please bear in mind that education in emergencies is one of the key strategic areas of the Global Campaign for Education. And as Bernard mentioned, education in emergencies is a critical aspect of all our actions. When we talk about financing education, we are thinking about education in emergencies to provide more resources and to advocate for national governments and the international community investing and putting education at the very front of the list of key activities to protect people's rights and to secure the right to education. Second, we are here, I mean, in the education and emergency learning communities to collaborate with you all. So please feel free to send an email, to send an idea, share whatever you want to share. We can put that on our Learning Hub, or you can do that directly if you already have the credentials, and just keep this education in emergencies learning community active as it should be, because as I mentioned at the very beginning, we are living in a context we can see emergencies everywhere. And so if we join the force and our voices, we can really make a difference in the way we are protecting education in emergencies in all the contexts. Thank you also all the people who made comments and questions, and hope to see you in the next time. Finally, thank you to the interpreters. Thank you, Salma, Kuselwa, and Rosalena for your support with this session. And bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much. See you later.
See you later, alligator.
Bye-bye. See you, Bernard. Thank you.